The House will come to order. The pledge this morning will be said by Esther Crooks and Alexis Cluse from Heritage Elementary School in Highlands Ranch, Colorado.
Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For you. And I missed. Hold on just a second. Mr. Randall, please call the roll.
Representatives Arndt, Baisley, Beckman, Benavides, Byrd, Bockenfeld, Buck, Buckner, Buckner, Puenteo, Caraveo, Carver, oh, thank you, Catlin, Coleman, Cutter, Duran, Escar, Exum, Froelich, Galindo, Garnett, Geithner,
Yeah, I think we're gonna.
Gonzalez Gutierrez, Gray, Hanson, Harrod, Putin, Humphrey, Jackson, Jaquez Lewis, Kennedy, Kipp, Kraft-Tharp, Landgraf, Larson, Lewis, Liston, Lontine, McCluskey,
Excused.
McKean, McLaughlin,
I realized you're so much skinnier than
Melton,
it. Hold on.
Melton.
Michelson Janae,
Excused.
Mollica, Neville, Pelton, Rankin, Ransom, Rich, Roberts, Roberts,
He's right there coming in.
oh, thank you, Sane, Sane, Sandridge, Singer,
Singer's excused because he's out for us. Oh, he showed up.
Sirota, Snyder, Soper, Sullivan, Tipper,
Be a bit brace, so.
Tatone, Valdez A, Valdez D, Van Winkle, Weissman, Williams, Wilson, Madam Speaker.
With 63 present and 2 excused, we have a quorum. Before we go into announcements and introductions, Representative Byrd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is a privilege to serve with you.
It is a privilege to serve with you, Representative.
Madam Speaker, I move that the reading of the Journal of Thursday, January 17th, 2019 be dispensed with and approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk.
Members, you have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No. The motion is passed. Announcements and introductions. And I have an announcement. I am making a permanent committee change. Representative Kipp will be on Public Health and Human Services, and she'll be switching with Representative Sonia Yaquez-Lewis, who's going to the Committee on Health and Insurance. Any other announcements and introductions? Representative Hooton.
Yeah, we might just have to do it.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it is an honor to serve with you.
Representative
Oh,
Hooton.
Madam Speaker.
Way to go.
Members, I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming Ian Schwartz and Sean White, who are teachers at Casey and Centennial Middle Schools. They're schools from Boulder, and they are here today with their students. And this is their second year coming, and it's really great to greet students who have so much interest in the way government works. And I look forward to spending the day with you. Thank you.
Welcome, Casey and Centennial Middle Schools. Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is a pleasure to serve with you.
It's a pleasure to serve with you, Representative.
Good morning. I'm very excited to introduce a former state representative for House District 38, Kathleen Conti. She is now a county commissioner in District 1, serving Littleton and Centennial. It's great to have you in the House, Kathleen.
Good to see you, Representative. Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to serve with you.
Oh, it is an absolute pleasure to serve with you.
I was hoping you'd say that. I would just like to make the announcement that House Bill 1024 that was going to be in front of Education on the 22nd will now be in front of Education on the 31st. Thank you.
Representatives Wilson and Arndt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, Representative Arndt and I were up here earlier in this session giving you a heads up about the junior livestock sale at the National Western. And we told you that the House has always been good about raising more money than the Senate. And the Senate, in their wisdom, how they can mess things up for us, but in their wisdom, they said, you know, we had some people that actually gave us some change and so forth. So we have changed the perspective of this to the Cowboy and Cowgirl Caucus. So you buy in as a member of the Cowgirl and Cowboy Caucus, and your name will be listed instead of having the Colorado Legislature. It will be the Cowgirl Cowboy Caucus, and membership will be $250 for membership. And that sale will be next week, and we want to let you know today so that you can get your checkbooks and bring those on Monday.
That's right. And so far on our team, we have 2 members of the Cowboy and Cowgirl Caucus. So we're looking for more cowboys and cowgirls. Great. I just saw a hand go up. 2, 3. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So just to let you all know, on my side of the aisle, I don't have any memberships yet. So right now, this side of the aisle is ahead of us on the Cowboy and Cowgirl Caucus. Just saying. Thank you.
Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and members. I'd like to briefly introduce some fellow residents of Aurora who are with us today, Dr. Barbara Shannon Bannister and Paul Henrian, and Omar Montgomery I see as well. What to say? Dr. Bannister has been involved in civic matters in our city for 40 years, including in the commemoration of the MLK holiday and through our Aurora branch of the NAACP. Mr. Henryan has put in many, many hours entirely on a volunteer basis for the Legal Redress Committee of the NAACP, and Mr. Montgomery is currently branch president. Welcome, and thank you for coming down today.
Representative Weissman, that's a $1 fine. Representative Melton, no. Representative Gray, you can introduce your daughter.
I see. I don't get fight. Oh, down. Sorry. Hello. Good morning. I have a few introductions to make. One is my daughter, Ellie, is with us here, but she's down there right now, so you'll get to meet her here in a little while. Transportation and Local Government Committee, one more reminder. We have our relatively odd meeting today. Joint meeting with Senate Local Government and Senate Transportation and Energy upon adjournment, and of course with the esteemed Joint Budget Committee. So that is upon our final adjournment on the floor here today. I also wanted to welcome the folks from Colorado Moms Know Best who are spending the day today at the Capitol and left delicious cookies on your desk, so enjoy those. Thanks so much.
Representative, who's next? Kennedy? No. Hanson and Esgar. And Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, that's right. We have Representative Rankin for limited time only. But Representative Rankin, please join us at the podium. So to reinforce what our esteemed Chair of Transportation and Local Government just said, everyone involved in that committee, please take a look at this visual aid. Bring your budget summary book because we are going to cover line by line all the requests within your jurisdiction with our friends from the Senate. That is going to include local affairs, transportation, Public Utility Commission, Natural Resource, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and the Colorado Energy Office. Each one of those line items from the governor's requests is going to be covered in the joint committee hearing. So please read up and be ready.
Representative Esgar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members of the Rural and Agriculture Committee, can you raise your hand? 8 a.m. Tuesday morning, Joint Budget Committee is coming to visit you. Take your purple book home this weekend and take a look at it, study it, get ready with some questions because we want to hear your input.
Representative Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So remember, this is your big chance. You don't have to stick to what's in the purple book. You can advise the Joint Budget Committee on issues pertaining to these committees. So, think through it. We don't have many opportunities to hear from you, and this is very important, so take it seriously.
Representative Exum, anyone? McLaughlin, yes, okay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to introduce some guests from Colorado Springs. President Henry Allen of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Pikes Peak, and also over on this side, members of the Youth Council of the Pikes Peak Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Stand up, folks. Stand. Please welcome them.
Representative Exum, that's a $1 fine. Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sorry to do this again. We have a Joint Budget Committee is coming to Joint Education Committee Wednesday morning at 7:30. I would like everybody, especially from education committees, to join us there, please. Thank you.
Representative Herod. No. If you don't have an announcement to make, how about if you do have an announcement to make, raise your hand. Anyone? Representative Rankin.
Madam Speaker, it's a pleasure to serve with you.
It's a pleasure to serve with you, Representative.
A moment of personal privilege.
A moment of personal privilege is granted.
So members, this is my last day with you after 6 years and a few months. So it's a day of mixed emotions for me. I read a book recently about capturing life's moments. And for me, this is one of those moments. And in thinking about it and trying to capture it, I was trying to get in touch with my feelings, thinking about how it really feels so that I can remember it in years in the future. And like most of us, my feelings are conflicted about this. I don't know, I'm not sure that I'm not being banished to the dark zone for having committed malfeasance in office and having the inability to accurately add numbers or perhaps subtract numbers. So that's one thought, years of hard labor ahead. The other thought is maybe I'm like an old plow horse, who after years of plowing the fields is being put out to pasture in semi-retirement. But I'll think about that and I'll report back to you in the years to come and what it's like over there. It's one or the other. But I'll stay on the Joint Budget Committee, evidently, and I've committed to my caucus and to my replacement, Representative Ransom, that I will continue to work for all of you one-on-one, when you need it. And that goes for all of you. I've been here a long time. I've been it's my 5th year on the Budget Committee. I know stuff. So if you need to know what that department said 2 or 3 years ago, please ask me. But having said that, with those conflicting emotions and, all the jokes we make about the Senate, I really do look forward to the next few years and continuing to serve. But I want to leave just with a couple of thoughts. First of all, thank you to the staff. You guys are wonderful. The sergeants, our assignables. This wonderful old historic chamber that I've grown to love comes alive every day. And it doesn't come alive. I mean, the history's here. We all love it. But it's the people that make it come alive every day for us. And every day is a pleasure. But to all of you, just thinking back about moments, we're real busy here. And it's hard sometimes to capture those moments. But my advice is try hard, play hard, work hard, go to all the social events, form friendships, do all that stuff, and stop along the way to think about the real highlights, the moments. Because very few people get to do this. Very small percentage of the people in the United States get to serve their fellow citizens in state legislators. Somebody told me that first year I was here. And I've felt that ever since. And it's going to go fast. Believe me, it seems like yesterday when I was here for the first time. This is my 4th term limited, no more, but I was. But it's going to go really fast. So take notes, develop memories, develop friendships, capture those moments. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to serve with all of you.
Representative Rankin, we will miss you tremendously. Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to proceed out of order for consideration of resolutions.
The motion is to proceed out of order for consideration of resolution. Seeing no objection, Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Joint Resolution 1006.
House Joint Resolution 1006 by Representatives Melton and Harrod, also Senators Fields and Williams, concerning the commemoration of the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Representative Harrod.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move HJR 1006 and ask that it be read at length.
Whereas the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia on January 15, 1929, graduated from Morehouse College with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1948, graduated from Crozer Theological Seminary in 1951, and received a PhD from Boston University in 1955. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's faith, resiliency, and commitment to justice became known worldwide through his speeches, writings, and actions. And whereas Reverend Dr. King declared that the moral responsibility to aid the oppressed did not stop at the edge of his street, town, or state when he wrote, "I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And whereas Reverend Dr. King withstood attacks on his home and family, among numerous other threats and setbacks, standing firm in his conviction that although the arc of the moral universe is long, it bends towards justice. And whereas Reverend Dr. King led the Montgomery bus boycott, a 13-month protest beginning in 1955 against the segregated city bus lines. And whereas the Montgomery bus boycott led to the integration of the Montgomery city bus system and is widely credited as the beginning of the civil rights movement in America. And whereas in 1957, Reverend Dr. King was elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization formed to provide leadership for the burgeoning civil rights movement. And whereas between 1957 and 1968, Reverend Dr. King spoke more than 2,500 times, wrote 5 books, as well as numerous articles, led protests, helped register African American voters, was arrested more than 20 times, was awarded 5 honorary degrees, was named Man of the Year by Time magazine, and became the symbolic leader of the African American community, as well as a worldwide figure. And whereas on August 28, 1963, Reverend Dr. King directed the March on Washington, wherein more than 200,000 Americans gathered in the name of equality and civil rights, and which culminated in Reverend Dr. King's historic I Have a Dream speech. And whereas the leadership of Reverend Dr. King was instrumental in bringing about landmark legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited segregation in public accommodations and facilities and banned discrimination based on race, color, or national origin, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which eliminated remaining legal barriers to voting for disenfranchised African American voters. And whereas in 1964, Reverend Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his tireless and selfless work in the pursuit of justice for African Americans and other oppressed people in America. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's 13 years of nonviolent leadership ended abruptly and tragically when on April 4th, 1968, he was assassinated while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's life and work continue to echo in our lives as we strive to reach the lofty goal he set when he said, "Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillant beauty." And whereas Reverend Dr. King's birthday is a federal holiday in the United States and a state holiday in the state of Colorado, which is celebrated each year on the 3rd Monday in January. And whereas on Monday, January 21st, 2019, we celebrate the 33rd anniversary of Reverend Dr. King's holiday, now therefore be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 72nd General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the Senate concurring herein, that we, the members of the Colorado General Assembly, hereby encourage appropriate observances, ceremonies, and activities to commemorate the federal and legal state holiday honoring the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. throughout all cities, towns, counties, school districts, and local governments within the state of Colorado.
Excuse me, Representative Melton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. And members, we're actually going to proceed slightly out of order with the resolution because this is a joint resolution. We want to make sure that there's time enough for the Senate to have this heard and passed in their chamber. So, members, we're going to actually vote first, and then we will allow members to come and comment on the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. And so I would ask for an aye vote on HJR 1006. Oh, I move HJR 1006 and ask for an aye vote.
Okay, thank you. Seeing none, the motion is for the adoption of HJR 19-1006. Is there any objection to taking a voice vote? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. HJR 19-1006 is adopted. Representative Melton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. I ask that the current roll call be added as co-sponsors.
No objection. The roll call will be added to the journal. Okay.
Is there any discussion regarding this resolution? Representative Harrod.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. It is an honor to serve with you and to see you above me as we proceed to honor the legacy of Dr. King. Members, now we'll have an opportunity for us all to speak, should we choose to celebrate and honor the legacy of Dr. King. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was almost 200 years after those words were set to paper that in 1963, Martin Luther King led a movement, the March on Washington. People from all over the United States and from all walks of life gathered on that day. There were over 250,000 people in attendance. They gathered to draw attention to the continuing challenges and inequities that African Americans continue to endure 100 years after emancipation. Because of that march, the Civil Rights Act was passed. Because of that march, the Voting Rights Act was signed into law. Because of that march and the years that followed the Voting Rights Act, record numbers of African Americans registered to vote, and across the South, blacks were elected to public office. And because of that march, America followed a path towards greater fairness and equality. And yes, because of that march, I stand in front of you today, elected to this state house as the first LGBT African American to serve in Colorado. Thank you. I will never take for granted the tireless efforts of those who came before me, of those who marched and protested, who spoke out against injustice and yes, risked their lives for the equality of all. I will not forget those who fought so hard so that we can honor King's legacy here today, right here in Colorado. Nor will I dishonor them by suggesting that little has changed, because in fact, much has changed. Because of that march, my path is indeed brighter. But I will also not claim that the march towards equality is complete. That too would dishonor them. Because today, the march must continue. We have not reached that finish line. Today, we must all continue the march towards equality. You know, this morning, as I was reminding myself of the words of Dr. King, as I listened to a number of his grand speeches, and yes, he was a fine orator, I realized that while we honor his legacy today, we might sometimes forget his message. He not only spoke to the plight of African Americans, but encouraged us all to fight for all of those who are oppressed. He urged us not to mistrust our white brothers and sisters, but instead for us all to link arms and stand together, for we cannot walk alone. Dr. King warned us against incremental change, and instead urged us not to be satisfied until things like police brutality are a thing of the past, until black and brown children can graduate at the same rates as their Caucasian counterparts, until health and income disparities are a thing of the past. No, Dr. King did not preach for us to be patient, and I am not patient. He did not advocate for us to wait and to let time solve all of our problems. Instead, he taught us not to be patient, not to be satisfied until justice rolls down upon us and flows like a mighty stream. The urgency of now is not behind us. Today, African Americans are overrepresented in our prisons and jails. Thousands of federal workers in Colorado and throughout this country are working without pay. Children are being ripped from their parents, and displacement has become commonplace in our community. The urgency of now means that we have a lot of work to do, members. We must fight for all of those in our communities. We have not reached that finish line. So yes, the urgency of now leads me to embrace this resolution wholeheartedly and to reach out to all of you in this chamber so that we can work together towards greater equality, one that is attainable for all. And this battle should not be predicated by hate or fear, but like MLK said, our battle should be based on hope and love. and the aspirations of everyday people. The time is always right to do what is right. Let us march on together. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Representative Harrod, and I didn't get to say this earlier, but it is definitely my honor to serve with you. Representative Melton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem, and it is an honor to serve with you.
Thank you.
I rise in support of HJR 1006, honoring Dr. Martin Luther King, and I find that it's fitting that we always begin the session honoring his birthday and his legacy. We need to be reminded of his words as we begin to reflect this state and as we begin to represent and speak out for the people that we represent. Recently, I was having a conversation with a colleague at a party about a week ago. It's a colleague that I've served with for a couple of years, but I couldn't say that I knew her very well. We were kind of talking about a criminal justice matter, and it led to what I would say was a conversation about privilege and about perspective. And for some reason, this conversation, it kind of just stuck with me this past week as I've been thinking about what I was going to say here today. I even went back and I looked at some of Dr. King's speeches, and one speech in particular stood out. It was actually his last speech that he has reached the mountaintop. It's a speech that I know I've heard many times in my life, and most of the time we focus on the end of that speech where he talks about how he's reached the mountaintop and how he's seen the promised land. But for some reason, that didn't really scratch the itch I was feeling. So I went back and I listened to the beginning of that speech. And at the beginning of that speech, he talks about how he wanted to ask the Almighty for a panoramic view of history. See, he wanted to expand his perspective throughout time. He said that he would ask the Almighty to take him to Egypt to see the Hebrews being led out and into the promised land, but that wasn't enough. He wanted to then go to ancient Greece and up on Mount Olympus and hear the great philosophers discuss things that still baffle us today. But that still wasn't enough. He then wanted to go to the Roman Empire and see the emperors discovering a world that was discovering itself. But yet that still wasn't enough. He then wanted to go to the Renaissance and see how culture and how our aesthetics were being developed. But still that wasn't enough. He wanted to go and see his namesake begin what was to be the Reformation. And yet still that wasn't enough. He then wanted to go to see President Lincoln sign the Emancipation Proclamation. And yet that still wasn't enough. He wanted to go to 1930 and watch FDR as he grappled with the Great Depression and still be able to look at Americans and say that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And that still wasn't enough. He ended this diatribe by saying, I would go to the Almighty and I would ask to live just a little longer to see the second half of the 20th century. That speech hit me when he said that because he was assassinated the next day. Here we are in the 21st century, and we have an opportunity like none other has had before to expand our perspective just as he wanted to expand his. But our perspective can be expanded not simply through time, but be expanded in each other. Members, we have more women that are serving in this legislature than ever before. We have more Latinos and Latinas serving in this legislature than ever before. We have more LGBTQ members serving in this legislature than ever before. And we have maintained the historic numbers of the Black Caucus and have more African Americans serving than ever before. We have an opportunity here, members, to really expand our perspective. I think on opening day it was said best actually by the minority leader who said in his opening day speech that people on the outside, they want to use labels like racist and un-American because they don't want us to join together in dialogue. But members, that's exactly what we need to do if we're to govern. We need to be able to look towards each other and reach towards each other and begin to see each other for who each other is. If we don't do that, members, we have a problem. I'll tell you this, you don't have to call me the N-word to make me feel like one. When you marginalize my voice, that is what you're doing. When you ignore my experience, that is what you're doing. When you fail to see the man that stands before you right now, to see me for me, that is what you're doing. You see, my culture is more than just the way I wear my hair. My culture is more than the food that I eat. My culture is more than the music that I listen to. My culture was seeded out of necessity. It is rooted in experience, it grows out of challenge, and it blooms in hope. And until we begin to see each other and really move beyond just the exterior, understanding what it is that makes us who we are, then we live in a place of privilege. Privilege is just a lack of perspective. And members, I know that we can do better. I know that we can reach that mountaintop. But we have to begin to see each other for more than just what's on the outside. We can't reach the mountaintop if you drive by the black man that's being handcuffed on the side of the road. We can't reach the mountaintop if you ignore the gay student who is getting bullied on social media. We can't reach the mountaintop if you ignore the fact that women are paid less than men for the same job. We can't reach the mountaintop if you can't build that wall and ignore the thousands of overstayed visas. We can do better. I believe we can do better, and I believe we must do better. I believe that that's what Dr. King wanted to see. He wanted to see us see each other. That's what I want. Members, I want to see you, and I hope that you will see me. I thank you for this, and again, I ask for your support of this resolution.
Thank you, Representative Melton. I'd like to recognize Representative Adrian Benavides.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem.
Thank you.
Members, I rise in support of this resolution today. I am so proud and pleased to join my colleagues and our guests in tribute to one of the most important persons in our history. Martin Luther King was not always afforded accolades like those that are offered here today. He lived in turbulent times, and many saw him as subversive. But many more recognize the importance of his work and the personal and political sacrifices he and so many others made so that we could have a better and stronger United States. When Martin Luther King was murdered on April 4th, 1968, I was a couple of weeks short of my 14th birthday. I was in the 8th grade at Loyola Elementary Catholic School here in Denver. And I remember watching the news that night with my family on TV and of being saddened and apprehensive about what might happen. But here in Denver, things were relatively quiet. Even though we lived in Northeast Denver in a predominantly black area of Denver, I don't remember an overwhelming fear or anger, but more a true sense of loss. A loss of this good man, but also a potential loss of the promise of what the civil rights movement was and could be. Martin Luther King had come to Denver on several occasions. On January 24th, 1964, he spoke at DU, and King extolled the crowd to think of the world as a brotherhood. And he pointed out that we have a responsibility to end the notion that there are superior and inferior races. He wanted us to see the unique value of each individual, a lesson we are still learning. But I am so proud that this year, in 2019, we have 8 African American legislators and 15 Latino legislators in these chambers. These 23 legislators are a first in Colorado, a sign that King's dream still reverberates here in Colorado, here in the People's House. As a member of the Latino Caucus, I join my fellow caucus members in joining with the Black Caucus in recognition of this great man. In Dr. King's last major speech here in Denver, also at DU, less than a year before he was killed, he spoke to about 2,000 people on May 18th, 1967, again at DU. But when he spoke, there were at least 2 cross burnings outside. And nearby, there was a car that was overturned and set afire. In that speech, Martin Luther King encouraged the people to demonstrate against segregation and to support stronger civil rights laws. The newspapers reported that King rejected the idea that legislation and judicial and executive decrees cannot solve problems of discrimination. The paper went on to quote King as saying that morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. King was right. Even though the first civil rights law was passed in 1964, the 1968 Civil Rights Act was signed by President Johnson on April 11th, 1968. That law strengthened our laws on public accommodations and housing. I mention that to point out that King believed that one way to make change, to stand up for and to protect those most vulnerable and in need of our help, was through the work we do in making laws. We must always be cognizant of this charge. We cannot allow political calculations based on the outcome of our next election to outweigh our moral obligations on behalf of the people of this state. And today, it's more important, because today in this country, in this state, hate crimes are on the rise. People are even afraid to report crimes. In times now when children are being separated from their families at the border, we must do more than talk about King's legacy. We as legislators must shoulder our responsibility and do everything we can, including passing laws to end injustice. We must remember King's words when he said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Benavides. Representative Buck.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'm absolutely just honored and delighted to be a co-sponsor on this resolution. I would be selfish to think that I could have my dear friends stay with me through this whole thing, but I know you are wanted in the Senate chambers, so if you get a text to get your tails over there, I understand. So just honored to have you here, and thank you so much. Madam Chair, I am honored and I am humbled to speak today and recognize a truly great man and acknowledge the day that we honor him. And I'm honored because of the high degree of respect and love that I have for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. His life, his achievements, his legacy, and more importantly, his resolute adherence to his faith. But I am humbled when I consider the significant contributions he made to our society in the brief 39 years of his life. Dr. King devoted his life to freedom, equality, civil rights, and he fought for these ideals with a dedication and devotion, and most importantly, his relentless theme of nonviolence and love. Not fighting so much, love. even in the face of fierce and sometimes physical, forceful opposition. Dr. King's message is just as relevant today as it was during his lifetime. We should look at his extraordinary life of Dr. King as our guiding principles to treat our fellow mankind. And I submit to all of you that we strike the word diversity due to the division it causes us and recognize that we have more that unites us than divides us. And at the end of the day, we all bleed the same color. Dr. King maintained a consistent response, and his response was not of hatred, violence, bitterness, but his response was one of love. Dr. King himself so wisely pointed out in his book, and I encourage all of you to read it, Strength to Love. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. It's believed this quote came from his sermon Dr. King gave in 1957, over 60 years ago. And it was a sermon in which Dr. King was urging his followers to love their enemies. What a message. As I mentioned above, it's a message that is as relevant today as it was 60 years ago. Like Dr. King, we all have a dream. We can all dream of a world free of hate, bias, and discrimination. What a wonderful dream. He lives in my heart, and I ask that he lives in yours. We can best honor Dr. King by responding to the injustice as we preached, more importantly, as he acted, not with hatred, not with disrespect, not with violence, but with love. Love and understanding and forgiveness. I'm speaking of a true, heartfelt love for your fellow man, regardless of race, creed, color, ethnic origin, disability, or sex. I want to go on record today that I truly say that I love each and every one of you, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. It is impossible to look back at life's teachings of Dr. King without a sense of awe, admiration, and in the face of extremely strong opposition, and often in the face of defeat, he maintained his faith, his guiding light, which gave him strength. It allowed him to provide a powerful, consistent message of adversity, in the face of adversity. And it is no wonder that Dr. King has inspired so many and will continue to inspire so many generations to come. Again, I tell every one of you that I truly love you. And in all together, we are brothers and sisters in God's eyes. God bless you all.
Thank you, Representative Buck. Representative Jackson.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. My office is filled with symbols of strength and determination. Behind my desk is an image my mother brought back with her from a trip to Africa. In it, a young African warrior stares out with clarity. One of my sheroes, Shirley Chisholm, adorns a wall. She was, of course, the first African-American woman in Congress and the first woman and African-American to seek the nomination for president of these great United States. In a case sits a Kachina doll, this one carved by the Hopi people. It is an eagle, which is a representation of courage. There are also pictures of the Tuskegee Airmen, who were the first African-American military aviators in the United States Armed Forces. We all know that the military was racially segregated during their World War II service. There is also, on a wall, a statement on compassion from the Dalai Lama. And yes, in a case sits a notorious RBG doll. Of course, there is also a picture of the Reverend Dr. King waving to the crowd during the historic 1963 March on Washington. The event, as we all know, aimed to draw attention to continuing challenges and inequalities faced by African Americans a century after emancipation. These archetypes offer me a great deal of comfort, just as many of you do. I want you to know that I personally, sincerely appreciate all allies who help to battle the injustices African Americans and all people of color continue to face. It is especially important to have those with privilege stand by our side, as their voices are still too often the ones with the most power. Still today, in this very building, just upstairs, I have to have that safe haven and to surround myself with all of those healing images. Because the fight against oppression that Dr. King brought to our consciousness so many decades ago still very much exists. And so it is imperative that we all work together to continue Dr. King's work for the betterment of the lives of every single solitary individual in Colorado. For yes, we all continue to dream. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Jackson. Representative Landgraf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Short person here. Sorry. Thank you, Speaker Pro Tem.
Thank you, Representative Landgraf.
And very good friend.
We are good friends.
We are. So this morning, I went to my desk and I started looking up to see if, in fact, the Reverend Martin Luther King was a Republican, like we've heard so much about. And I read some of the stories, and I read some of the opposite stories, and I decided it absolutely didn't matter. It is the absolute last thing that matters on a day like today. And then I started thinking about, unlike some of you, I was alive when he was killed. I was alive and able to watch on various newscasts the horrible things that were being done at schools and across the country. I was alive at a time when people thought it was perfectly fine to refer to members of a different race by vile names. And I have to admit, and believe it or not, I was never one of those. I never understood it except to blame ignorance and fear. That doesn't make me any more of an expert on Martin Luther King than anybody in this room. In fact, I would say I'm far from it. But I do know this. Dr. Martin Luther King devoted his life to bringing people together, not driving them apart. And I think we today and every day should take a lesson from this and try to emulate that great man and do what we can to bring us together, not continually drive apart. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Landgraf. Representative Exum.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. We've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go. Although economic disparities between whites and blacks have persisted over the past half-century, there still has been progress. Racial barriers have lessened, the nation has grown wealthier and better educated. All our collective work since marchers assembled on the wall in 1963 will be meaningless, however, if we cannot improve on a long list of economic disparity ratios. But that's a different discussion. Today, let's celebrate other metrics that spotlight racial progress in our nation since 1963. Black voter turnout has risen considerably, closing the gap with whites. That's particularly true in the South, where few blacks could vote in the 1960s before the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act changed Congress, the number of black members in Congress rising eightfold. It is now possible to have black presidents. That's presidents with an S. Black life expectancy has risen sharply since 1963, narrowing the gap with whites. The gap in high school graduation rates is slowly improving. Black college graduations continue to rise. However, the gap between blacks and whites has widened over time. Therefore, education must continue to be a priority. More blacks are breaking into the middle class and upper class. That was not the case in the 1960s. I myself was a beneficiary of Dr. King's legacy in that I was able to graduate from college, and because of Dr. King's pre-civil rights work and affirmative action, I was allowed the opportunity to join the Colorado Springs Fire Department in the early 1970s and retire 35 years later as a battalion chief. This is why I support Joint Resolution 106 concerning the commemoration of the birthday of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. We must continue evolving. In closing, Dr. King shouted out to different geographical regions in his I Have a Dream speech. In addition, what he said bears repeating today as we support this resolution. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. God bless you.
Thank you, Representative Exum. Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. It's an honor to serve with you.
It's an honor to serve with you as well, Representative Beckman.
I stand in support of Resolution 1006 today, and I'd like to share with you a story about the special relationship that the city of Littleton that I represent has with Martin Luther King. This information was gathered from the Littleton Museum. When Flight 402 Atlanta landed at Denver Stapleton Airport on Friday, January 23, 1964, the plane carried Martin Luther King. He was planning to speak in Denver, but when the citizens of Littleton learned that Dr. King's visit, they called and asked if he would visit our community. When Dr. King came to Littleton, it was just 2 months after President Kennedy was assassinated. Dr. King had just been named Time Magazine's Man of the Year, and later that year, he would receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Garrett Ray, the editor of the Littleton Independent, reflected on his visit. We were still a county seat kind of a town, but we were growing, and even though we didn't feel like a suburb, we were becoming one. At that time, Littleton had a very strong identity as a community. Now, that was a community that was, for all practical purposes, totally white. Editor Garrett Ray received Dr. King's call and was in attendance when Dr. King met with citizens in Littleton at the Littleton's Grace Presbyterian Church with the speech, "The Soul of a Nation." We're struggling in the final analysis to save the soul of a nation, he said. We're struggling also to save the image of our nation. Therefore, it is imperative for the nation to work passionately and unrelentingly now to get rid of this cancer of segregation and discrimination. Littleton is a better place because of his visit. Martin Luther King's visit is reflected in a permanent display at the Littleton History Museum.
Thank you, Representative Beckman. Representative Tatone.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem, and it's an honor to serve with you.
And it is my pleasure as well to serve with you.
I wouldn't be standing here before you if it weren't for the civil rights movement, and we owe that strongly to Dr. King. And after the election, I had the privilege of being down in Washington, D.C. and going to the memorial in Washington, D.C. for Dr. King. And if you do go down there, I do recommend going at night. The shadows cast on the quotes and the statue there is quite compelling. And it was a very powerful moment for me because I realized how important what he did and how that impacts me and so many other people. And, you know, equality is getting better, as has been said, but we really do have a lot more to go. And as we get closer to equality, we can still continue to look back at the words and actions of Dr. King. And we should be inspired for that, and we should strive towards equality for all. We are making historic firsts in representation, but we must be vigilant and mindful of our actions and mindful of the privilege that we have, and not be unchecking our privilege. And in this building, we have a lot of people with a lot of privilege, and I would like everyone to recognize that privilege. Let us all recognize and be cognizant of post behaviors, and let history not repeat itself. Let us realize the dream that Dr. King saw and celebrate today Dr. King and support the resolution HJR 1006, and celebrate Dr. King this year and every year, and look forward to the day when equality really is a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Carver.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. What has always struck me so strongly about Dr. Martin Luther King, in addition to his intense faith and spirituality and staying the course through, I think, some of the most challenging times an individual could go through for an individual and their family, is the words he had to say about the unfilled promise. We have a great privilege in this country when we look at our Bill of Rights, a document so unique in history, and the pledge and promise that that makes for all of us. And to me, perhaps as a lawyer and somebody who has studied history and the Constitution, his act was revolutionary, but perhaps not revolutionary, in calling out what? The stark contrast between the promises made in the Constitution and Bill of Rights and the reality of the world in which he lived. And so, in his I Have Been to the Mountaintop speech, he talks about injunctions that have been placed against he and the civil rights movement to stop speaking out about the unfilled promises 200 years later, right? And he said, all we say to America is, be true to what you said on paper. If I had lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they hadn't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right. There are a few things that get me as emotional as the unique moments in history when human beings call upon the best, those very flawed individuals who wrote that Constitution and our Bill of Rights, and strived in that moment of history for a recognition of what an individual life should be in the best sense. Our freedom of conscience, our freedom of speech, our freedom to explore and think and strive and work and create. And Dr. King looked at our country and said, my fellow Americans, what I ask for is for you to meet our mutual pledge to each other, our mutual covenant, and make real the promises made in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights for every single one of us. And it is amazing that, and I'm sure he thought as he woke up with all he was suffering, all his family was suffering, and to say, really? Really, in 1950 and 1960, I have got to put my life on the line, the life of my family on the line, to call on this country to change and to meet the promises made in our Constitution and Bill of Rights. And in a small way, that's part of the duty we have, isn't it? Is as we're looking at laws, as we face new challenges, how do we stay true and reflect not just on paper, not just at commemorations, not just our speeches. How do we make real in the deepest way in our country and in our state the realization of those principles for every single one of our fellow Americans and those that live in this country? What a challenge we have. What a privilege we have in this room to try and do that in our own small way and on our watch, to do the best we can on our watch. I rise in strong support of this resolution.
Thank you, Representative Carver. Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. I think I've commented to you and others here. It's hard to rise on this occasion because it's a high bar and a big legacy that we have to measure ourselves against. And I'm additionally finding it hard this morning to be measured against the comments that some of my own colleagues have made. I think maybe it's a testament to what the legacy calls forth in all of us. So this is the year after the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's passing in 1968. And as I thought about what that means over the days and even months leading up to this day, I thought about what the year after 1968 must have meant. I wasn't around in 1969, and a lot of us here weren't either. But when Dr. King was tragically taken from the world on April 4th, 1968, the national and I think also the global movements for racial and economic justice suffered a grievous blow. But they did not stop. Those movements did not stop on April 4th, 1968. And they continued into 1969, the year after, and they have continued every year since, and they continue today in our time, and they must continue beyond our time. I think that's so for a lot of reasons, not least of which is that is what Dr. King himself urged in his own time. In fact, within 24 hours prior to his own passing. That's the mountaintop speech on April 3rd, 1968. Dr. King said, "I may not get there with you," but he continued, "We've got to give ourselves to this struggle until the end. Nothing would be more tragic than to stop at this point in Memphis. We've got to see it through." And he kept going. "Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation." he said in 1968. And 51 years later, we too have an opportunity to make America a better nation and to make Colorado a better state as well, a more equitable, a more inclusive state. And in so making it, to make it also a more prosperous state. And I think that in our 65 different ways, we all know this, we have all felt this for a long time, and that's why we've set ourselves on the paths that led us here to this legislature. And I know that as we are here, we live in divisive times, we all feel that. But Dr. King lived in divisive times too, and he knew it, and he acknowledged it on that day in 1968. He said, "Trouble is in the land, confusion all around." That's a strange statement, but I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. And I see God working in this period of the 20th century in a way that men in some strange way are responding. And I thought just this morning, I think I'm at least the third of us to refer to that particular speech on that day in 1968. I think even within this chamber, all of us are responding by finding our way to those words and their applicability today. So notwithstanding the trouble and confusion, Dr. King went on to urge, let us keep the issues where they are. The issue is injustice. And 51 years later, we know that we still confront injustice in many ways. Injustice in issues of crime and punishment, injustice in access to health care, injustice in the ability or inability to grab hold of the ladder of economic progress and climb up without rocks falling down from above. And there are many injustices in these injustices based on income, based on where you were born, based on access to power. But candidly, there are profound racial injustices in all of these things, and we will not solve them until we stare them in the face, however uncomfortable that may be. So I believe that we honor Dr. King and his legacy this year and every year by recommitting ourselves to work to reduce injustices in these ways. And as we so recommit ourselves, and my colleague from Denver has hit upon this theme already, we must deeply feel the fierce urgency of now, and we must act from that, because our moment right now requires no less of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Weissman. Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. I was not going to get up today, but then I realized how many new faces we have in the chamber, and Representative Singer knows what I'm going to bring up. We go through a lot of resolutions in this chamber, folks, and for those of you that are new, you'll find that we go through a lot of resolutions. And usually my response is, now what? And I want to raise that challenge again today. We're recognizing Martin Luther King and what he has done, and we talk about his speeches, and we talk about his life, and we talk about his legacy, and tomorrow we go home, and next Tuesday we'll be back here, and I would probably be willing to wager no one will be talking about Dr. Martin Luther King next Tuesday. That's our problem, folks, that's our problem. His legacy is that we are just humans, and we all should recognize that fact. I really don't care about Representative Melton's health as a black or a white man. I'm just excited that he's wearing that patch to get rid of those cigarettes so that he can live longer. And I really don't care what race the Representative Exum is. In another life, he's an official, and I just hope that God helps his vision improve, because I was coaching when he was officiating. It has nothing to do with race. And I just happen to love the other James brother just because he's a nice guy. I kind of like you, you know. So now what, colleagues? So I have to confess, I grew up on a farm east of Kiowa, Kansas, and I can tell you in the years that I grew up, racial diversity was not an issue in Kiowa, Kansas. I went to college, was a college student in the mid-'60s. Unlike many of you, I lived it. I didn't just read about it, I lived it. And as a college athlete, we were in a dorm that had the athletes in it, and my suite mates, some of you have heard this story, and for those of you that don't realize what suite mates are, at that time you had a bedroom here, and you shared the same restroom, and you just had your own kind of club there, and my suite mates were Fast Eddie Powell and Big Daddy Jordan. Fast Eddie was a black running back, about 5'10", 185 pounds. Big Daddy was my height and weighed 330 pounds. I didn't know any different. We were just good friends because I had no experience with racial diversity. I just figured people were people. And if you saw the picture that was up here earlier of Dr. Martin Luther King, you saw some of the people that had those inch-wide ties. We wore those inch-wide ties, no matter how funny they may look. And at that time, I must confess, I just saw Martin Luther King as a man. And he wasn't perfect. That's the flash here, folks. That's the news flash. He wasn't perfect. And as I grew older, I came to realize that none of us were, which was a revelation for a young college athlete like myself. I thought I was bulletproof and perfect and realized I wasn't. And then realized that we need to overlook those human fallibilities, and there was only one person ever walked the face of this earth, and that was Jesus, that was perfect, and the rest of us kind of have a hard time living up to that. And folks, as I talk about the challenge, what would Dr. King think of the tweets that you send on this floor about the people and what they're doing on this floor? I told you I was going to talk a little bit different than some others. And I'm stepping on people's toes, I realize that, but we can get up here and talk all we want, but if we don't act on it, what now? Then something's wrong. Was Dr. Luther King perfect? No. Did his human fallibilities keep him from doing what he wanted to do and pursuing his dream? No, it didn't keep him from doing that. It shouldn't keep us either. Do we honor him for his mistakes? No. We honor him for his accomplishments, for his mission, for his purpose. I think it's critical at this time, so much more even than last year when we did this, in our nation, in our state, in this chamber, and our personal lives, that we honor the totality of what Dr. Martin Luther King did and what he stood for, and the simple message was, what's the difference between each one of us? There really is not. So today of all days, I hope and pray that we, the people in this chamber, when next year we'll be back here again, honoring Martin Luther King's memory, we'll be able to say, we did something. What now? We did something. We changed something. And recognize that we're all imperfect, and we recognize that we are all different, but please recognize that each one of us has a dream. All 65 of us have a dream. And my challenge to you is that we overlook our imperfections, that we take the time to sit down with one another and talk about each other's dreams so that we understand one another and what those dreams are all about. And folks, we can talk all about the things and the speeches and so forth, but that doesn't begin in Washington. It begins right here, right now. Because if we don't dream together in this chamber, Dr. King's dream will surely die alone. It's up to us.
Speaker Pro Tem Buckner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's an honor to serve with you, and I just want to say publicly how pleased I am that you had enough faith to appoint me Speaker Pro Tem. Thank you.
Thank you for serving.
Last year, a lot of you remember that I came up to this podium and I got very emotional because something very upsetting and racial had happened to my granddaughter. And it really hit me hard. I had no idea that my remarks at the well, and it really warmed my heart. Most importantly, my remarks sparked a conversation about the reality of race in America both when I was growing up and today. People took so much time to reach out to me to talk about their experiences. It's like it gave them ownership, and they were not afraid to talk about their experiences anymore. A lot of them said they wished that they could have talked about incidents that happened to them, but they just weren't comfortable, and I gave them a comfort level to do so. I got a lot of hate mail, believe it or not, because of the comments I made about my experience. Couldn't believe I got hate mail about just talking about what happened to me. But I got more positive responses than hate mail. In fact, people were online defending me and calling the naysayers out. That felt good. Regardless of the progress that has been made, we must realize that there is always work to be done. We live in a time where race relations in recent years have gotten consistently worse, which is especially disappointing after having a Black president. We need to allow rooms for conversations, learning, and growth. These conversations may not be easy, but it's often the most uncomfortable conversations that are the most important. Right on, right? Thank you. In the amen corner, Representative Sane. Rather than looking for reasons to exclude, we must embrace diversity, as the people of Colorado have embraced diversity by electing the most diverse House of the state that the state has ever seen. My parents taught me to share my experiences, no matter how hurtful those experiences were. They told me to have courageous conversations and truly and intently listen to the stories and experiences of others. And my parents taught me how to be a bridge builder. They taught me how to be a peacemaker. And I want to speak my mother and father's names today. James Thomas, my father, Mary Elizabeth Thomas. They weren't well known. You don't recognize their names like Martin Luther King and other notables, but in their own right, they were peacemakers, and they were famous to me. We all win when we listen to each other, and by doing so, we find out that we are all more alike than we are unalike. I want to challenge everyone who hears me, who knows that we have more that makes us alike than what makes us different, to push back and reject rhetoric that has become more and more mainstream in recent times. In my lifetime, I have experienced some of the personal horrors of segregation, hate, Jim Crow, and I have hope that comes from the civil rights era, which paved the way for all of us. But unfortunately, as you all know, I have witnessed a resurgence of hatred and bigotry in this country, and unfortunately, just recently that has happened to me. So, I want all of you to reflect and think about what's been happening in our country, and I want you to make sure that you keep hope alive by supporting all of us. We have to address this reality, not tomorrow, not next week, not once a year, but every day. We need to honor the life and work of Mary and James Thomas and Martin Luther King by not allowing racism and bigotry and hatred to overwhelm us. And in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So I have a lot of friends down here. Please don't stay silent. Don't stay silent. And that's actually a quote from Martin Luther King. But I want you to remember, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. You all know how much I love all of you. And I have hope, and I'm not giving up on that hope.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Minority Leader Neville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And since I don't often get to praise your decisions, I do want to say you had an excellent pick in your Speaker Pro Tem.
Thank you, Minority Leader Neville.
Like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, I believe God raised up Moses to call the Israelites to return to the God of their fathers, leave the bondage of Egypt, and follow him into a better land and a better life. Like Dr. King, I believe God raised up the Older Testament prophets to urge repentance and return to their God. Like Dr. King, I believe that in the fullness of time, God raised up Jesus of Nazareth to preach the good news that the time of redemption had come, and then offer himself as payment for all of mankind's wrongdoing. I believe that George Washington was providentially appointed to lead our nation and provide a model of courageous, humble leadership, and that 10 years later, Abraham Lincoln was elevated to wipe the stain of slavery from our land. Time and again throughout human history, God has raised up leaders, some worthy on the face of it, others apparently unlikely, to bless nations, restore values, and bring healing. And so, with all of you, I believe God raised Martin Luther King Jr. to preach healing and restoration rather than division and retribution to a nation desperately in need of it. My own view is that resolutions we offer here from time to time should praise the departed rather than politicize the living. And so, Madam Speaker, I rise to join this body in remembering and celebrating the life and legacy of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. May God continue to shine his light on Dr. King, his family, and the great nation he helped forge.
Thank you for those wonderful words, Mr. Minority Leader. Thank you. Representative Singer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. So this is probably the first time that I've gone up to speak on this resolution because I know these days go long and there are people that are better spoken than I am on many issues, including this one. And so instead of making a speech, I almost want to engage in a dialogue or a conversation here in the best way possible without actually violating any House rules. So first of all, to those who have said, see me, I see you, but I can see you better. Martin Luther King said, I think we've got to see that a riot is the language of the unheard. A riot is the language of the unheard. It's the language of the unseen as well. And those feelings that bubble up in us because of the attacks that have come onto us because of who we are the hardest to overcome. As the only Jewish kid in my classroom in Boston, I was given an opportunity to talk about the holiday of Hanukkah during Christmas time while there was a Christmas tree in the elementary school cafeteria and a creche in the office. This is a public school, by the way. And that teacher was then reprimanded for allowing me to speak. And now I was known as that Jewish kid, right? Because I was given the opportunity, and they also saw that my teacher got in trouble for that. So you take middle school, you put race and ethnicity and religion on top of that, and it becomes potentially a boiler room. Not a riot, but potentially a boiler room. And then I think about 7th grade, standing in a cafeteria school line, right, the height of civility, and the kid in front of me turns and says, hey, I hear you're Jewish. And, didn't mean anything by it, just said, I hear you're Jewish. Of course, that gets around the school like everything else. And the kid behind me, once again, being middle school, he had grown to about twice the height and width of all of his peers, looked at this kid in the eye and looked at me and he said, Jonathan, does this kid give you problems? I felt as tall as that kid that day. So when I hear the pleas for allies, when I hear that people need to be seen for who they are, I feel compelled to go up and say that I see you, but I can see better. And I want to thank you for giving me those opportunities to check myself and to check my privilege when I've said things, hopefully not in the well, but have said things in the lobby and other parts of this building that could be construed as racist, that you've given me the opportunity to put myself into check, to think about that. And you've even given me the privilege and opportunity to maybe take a couple days to think about those things and do a little bit better. And I would just ask all of you that we shouldn't expect that of our friends, but when those opportunities do come up, to think about the language that Martin Luther King said in 1966, that I think we've got to see that a riot is the language of the unheard. Imagine a political person saying those words today. Imagine what the media would say about that person today, about them wanting to incite riots, about them wanting to further divide us. Those weren't divisive words, but they recognized the division. They saw the unheard and said, you know what? It's time to understand what the natural outcome of that could be. The other quote that I just wanted to share with you today is something we all talk about: education. Martin Luther King said in 1947, the function of education is to teach one to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. I want to thank my friends, my African American friends and colleagues here today, my Latino and Latina friends and colleagues here today, who have stood up and have given me the opportunity through educating me to increase my own character and to build my own character. And I will not forget what it means to be an ally when the Greek Orthodox friend of mine behind me stood up and made me feel as tall as he did. I rise in strong support of this resolution, and I thank you guys for your attention today.
Thank you, Representative Singer. And now, Representative Sain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Colleagues, we are standing in the moral arc of history today as we celebrate a reverend that changed history for all Americans. We have come a long way on that arc since the Reconstruction, when whites and blacks alike were in nearly equal numbers lynched for the crime of being Republican. What we celebrate today is the courage and fortitude of Martin Luther King and many others who endured beatings, ridicule, and the extinguishment of their very lives to force federal and state governments to recognize all Americans of every race, creed, religion as equals. And Americans of every race, creed, and religion stood with Reverend King to secure these recognitions and rights for all. Reverend King was a radical truth teller, but he did so in love that was supernatural, because it was. King compared his situation in the Birmingham jail to that of the Apostle Paul and strived to be a doer of the word, not just a hearer of the word. King's speeches were salted with the word of God. There's a lot of talk of love today, and I want to give a gift of love that the Apostle Paul wrote to the Corinthians that is relevant today in this chamber. It's 1 Corinthians 13, 1-3, and it says, "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all the mysteries and knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing." Do we celebrate a man today that advocated for riots? Do we celebrate a man today that shirked from the hard conversations and saying the hard things? Do we celebrate a man today that bowed his head to the powers of the world rather than the authority of heaven? Of course we aren't. I believe the Reverend Keene would have been disappointed in today's identity politics on both sides of the aisle. He wasn't for black or white power, but for God's power. And he routinely called out those who judged by the color of skin rather than the content of character. Therefore, colleagues, how could I honor Martin Luther King today without shining a light on injustice myself? My colleagues, how can you redeem your marginalized voice by marginalizing ours? Our march towards justice is not over. When a colleague is barred from introducing a resolution on this floor because of the color of her skin. Our march of justice is not over. When a member of this body who represents Americans of all races, creeds, and religions is told that Martin Luther King does not represent her heritage. The Reverend King stood on the mountain of the American dream for all of us. The dream was clear: freedom for all the children of God. That all live in a nation where they are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So therefore, colleagues, in the spirit that moved Dr. King, let's share in a radical love from now on. Let's share in a radical respect for each other on earth as it is in heaven, and treat each other as more worthy than ourselves. We are all privileged to serve each other and to serve the people of Colorado. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Sane. I know what your intent was. You have good intent. Normally, I would have to gavel you on impugning motives, but knowing you as I do, I will let it pass. Representative Kipp.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Martin Luther King once said, "Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right?" And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because it is right. That is what we must do here. That is what all of us must do every day in this chamber for the next, how many days do we have left? But that's what we all need to do here. I will be marching in Fort Collins on the Martin Luther King Parade on Monday. Wherever you are, wherever your home district is, I hope you will join us and stand shoulder to shoulder with all of the wonderful diversity that we have in our state, and always stand up and don't be a bystander when you see things that aren't happening that are right. Thank you. We march because it is the right thing to do.
Representative Soper.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. I rise also in support. I'd like to ask you a question. What are you doing on Monday? Some people in Colorado will take that as a free day to go skiing, and judging by the weather, they would be right. Others will take it as a day off to be able to catch up on work that they otherwise weren't able to do. I would like to share a little bit about my history and how it relates to MLK Day. As a student at Mesa State College, now Colorado Mesa University, I ran for student trustee. And in this race, my opponent was an African-American man on the football team. And we had an exact tie. We've all been in elections to get to this body. And you're probably thinking, in an exact tie, someone has to win and someone has to lose. Well, in this story, President Tim Foster said, "I think the intention of the voters was that each of you should win." Because the position is written into state statute, we had our Attorney General on the phone for a conference call. We had an opinion from his office, and we decided that it was the intent that both of us should hold the office. And part of it was because it was not necessarily a policy-setting position. So for that entire year,
the students at Mesa State College had two student trustees. And one thing that we both agreed on is that we always had to go to class on MLK Day, so we would fight to take the day off. We lobbied the Board of Trustees and we were successful. But we weren't successful. What we discovered that year is that students went skiing. They took the day off. They could care less about what it was that we were trying to honor that day. So the next year I ran again, and I said, I'm going to correct what we didn't achieve the first time. And I said, we need to have a school recognition where we read I Have a King, or I Have a Dream speech in the middle of campus, and we recognize Dr. King. And we try to remember that we should be focusing on what he strived to do every single day, not just on one holiday. And I would like to ask my colleagues here today that we don't just focus on one day and taking one day off, that it's actually every day that we should be thinking about the ideals that he strove for. So I too stand in support of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Soper. Representative Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. It's an honor to serve with you.
And it is my honor to serve with you as well.
How y'all doing? Lighten up. Dr. King, I believe if he was here today, would absolutely be the individual that you see in front of a microphone speaking with a passion because of whatever God had put on his heart. But I also believe that Dr. King enjoyed a meal with his family, enjoyed having conversations with his friends, and wasn't always the stoic individual we proclaim him to be. So like I said, lighten up. I stand today in support of this resolution, and one of the quotes that is really powerful for me that I think of with Dr. King is, if you haven't found something you are willing to die for, then you aren't fit to live. I also love the fact that Reverend Dr. King was fighting for people's rights when he was assassinated, and not just for civil rights, but for human rights, not just for civil equality, but for human equality. He was fighting for humanity, for people to treat each other with love and decency, especially when we disagree, when it's the hardest to do. In that, I challenge each of us, including myself, that if there's ever a disagreement, whether that's on a bill or a conversation that we've had with one another, that we ask ourselves, do we want answers or do we want an argument? Do we truly believe what we're saying and we love one another to change not only someone's perspective, but to change their heart? We get things done here in this legislature because we get votes. But that shouldn't be our intent. Yes, we vote on the bill in front of us, but when we talk about building relationships with each other, that has less to do with getting a bill passed and more to do with changing someone's heart. I don't get up and speak a lot, and when I do speak, more times than not, even though I would like to speak out against somebody or a person's perspective, I don't do that because what I really don't want is for them to make a public change. I want them to make an internal change. So when we're having conversations with each other, I ask that you would not only hear my words, but hold me accountable. Because if anyone disagrees on what's being said today from one colleague to another, ask yourself if your words are truly changing the person's heart for which they were intended. Or are they intended to create a reaction, evoke a negative response from that individual? Because if we're here to get work done for the people of Colorado, and I've said this many times before, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. If we're all Americans, when 9/11 happened, we were all Americans. On this day, we commemorate Dr. King, his birthday, his life well lived. Today, we remember in this moment, we're all Americans, but as my colleague said, the other James brother, What about the next time? What about the next time? There are a lot of tragedies that happen, and in that moment, we remember. And then 3 weeks later, 2 weeks later, maybe the next day, we go back to business as usual. And so when we make these comments, when we have these conversations and we talk, let us have the intention, as Dr. King did, as he has every year we celebrate, as he did, let us have the intention to change each other's hearts. This belief was rooted in his faith, and he could not live, preach, or march apart from the fact that love conquers all. John 15:13 says, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Now, I'm going to ask y'all a question because I'm a call and response preacher. I love y'all. Do you love me? I love you. We love each other. Enough to lay down one's life? So that means a political commitment in a campaign, but I would lay down my life. A perspective on an issue, but I would lay down my life. How I felt in the moment, but I would lay down my life. Surely, if you have not found something for which you would die for, we're not fit to live. Every day when we come in this chamber to get work done, come in here with the mindset that whatever I'm fighting for and believe in, I would lay my life down for it, and I would lay down my life for the people that it represents, not just in my district, but in this state and in this country. I love you guys.
Thank you, Representative Coleman, and we love you. Representative Melton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. And members, thank you for all the comments commemorating Dr. King today. I think today was a powerful day, and like I say, I'm proud and glad that we do this at the beginning of the session to set the tone for the session. Real quickly, we wanted to honor a few people that have made Martin Luther King Day in Colorado so unique and so important, and have really inspired my generation and generations to come. One of those people had to leave early, I think possibly also because of the weather, but that was Dr. Shannon Bannister, Barbara Shannon Bannister, excuse me. She has been serving as the Chief Director of the Community Relation Division in the city of Aurora. And Dr. Bannister has done so much, not only in Aurora, but in Denver as well, when it came to helping with the permitting, when it came to making sure that the Marade really got a good footing and has become the nationally recognized event that it is today. And so, although she's not here, I wanted to make sure to recognize her.
And Representative Harrod.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. And members, thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories, sharing your hopes for us, and helping us to set the tone for this legislative session. I want to rise today and honor a dear friend, a mentor, and a shero to this body, and that's the Honorable Wilma Webb. She founded the MLK holiday in this chamber so that we can honor it here today. I was speaking to Representative Webb as you were giving your speeches, and I saw tears in her eyes. When she fought for the holiday, she fought against both Democrats and Republicans to make this holiday a reality. The floor was tense, and people did not believe that we should celebrate his legacy in the way that was being proposed. I don't think she thought she'd see a day when Democrats and Republicans from both sides of the aisle would stand and honor him. Wilma, we owe this day to you. We owe this day to you. Thank you so much for your legacy. One thing I want to note, members, is that when Representative Webb fought for this holiday, she fought so hard that she lost her seat on the Joint Budget Committee. She fought so hard that people tried to silence her voice. The resolution, the bill to make this a holiday did not pass on the first or second time. It took numerous attempts to have this day that we are celebrating here today. And to see you all stand with us, with her, with each other in solidarity shows the path that Colorado now has. And it is the Colorado way forward, where we will work arm in arm, hand in hand, to bring equality to all those here in Colorado. The Honorable Wilma Webb not only established the MLK holiday, she also fought for the adoption of drug abuse and treatment programs. She fought for a law to add subpoena powers to the Civil Rights Commission and Division. She fought for something we've all heard a lot about, full-day kindergarten and mandatory K-12 education. She also introduced legislation to prevent discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. There is so much to this woman's legacy that I cannot say it right now in the little time that we have, but I do want to ask Speaker Pro Tem for a brief recess so that we may honor the Honorable Wilma Webb, greet her, and give her our thanks. I ask for a short, brief recess. Thank you, members, and thank you, Wilma Webb.
Thank you, Representative Herod, and we are going to have a brief recess. It is granted.
Thank you.
The House will come back to order. The next order of business is second readings. Representative Gray.
Seeing no objection, the House will,
You have heard the motion. The House has no objections.
or Representative Gray will check.
Representative Gray will take the chair. And he will take this big gavel.
No, actually, gavel.
Oh.
Ready? Okay. The committee will come to order. With your unanimous consent, bills will be read by title unless there's a request for reading a bill at length. Committee amendments will not be read unless requested, as they are printed and in your bill folders. 4 amendments will be shown on the screen and on your iPads and will not be read unless requested. Bills will be laid over upon the motion of the majority leader, and the coat rule is relaxed. Mr. Randall, will you please read the title of House Bill 1012?
House Bill 1012 by Representatives Beckman and Valdez. A. Alcinonis Fields concerning a flexibility of the Department of Personnel to administer the payment of controlled maintenance project from the proceeds of lease purchase agreements pursuant to Senate Bill 17-267.
Representative Beckman. Or Representative Valdez, whomever wants to go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 19-1012. There is no committee report and on second reading.
To the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some bills are really exciting and eventful. This bill is really all about keeping the train running and making sure that we give the people that work for the state of Colorado the tools they need to be effective. So I have had a lot of questions about this bill, controlled maintenance, so I'm just going to get into the weeds for a moment. Controlled maintenance projects are system maintenance-driven projects that address facility component systems at the end of their useful life, like heaters and air conditioning and the tunnels at Pueblo Mental Health Facility, roof boilers, floors, and they usually have a timeline of 3 years for them to get the project finished. And so when Senate Bill 267 was passed, there were $120 million worth of projects that were identified throughout the state of Colorado. Since these projects weren't appropriated like the regular controlled maintenance projects that we move forward from the Capital Development Committee to the Joint Budget Committee, the Department of Personnel does not have the flexibility that it does with all our other projects. They do a good job on our controlled maintenance projects. They do projects that are on time, on budget, but we always give them a little bit of flexibility. And so what this project will do is to allow them to move money within projects. If one project comes in a little bit higher, the bid comes in higher, or the bid comes in a little bit lower, and move the timeline around, they will have that flexibility. The commitment to the Capital Development Committee was the list of projects that were identified in 267 will be completed within the $120 million which was committed. And so this is a great bill. It just adds some flexibility And I would ask that you support it.
And I would also request.
Representative Valdez, would you like to be recognized?
Sorry.
Representative Valdez.
And I would urge an aye vote as well.
Representative Valdez, I wish you much more luck in this committee than your last committee. Is there any other discussion on House Bill 1012? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1012. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. House Bill 1012 is adopted. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1020.
House Bill 1020 by Representatives Roberts and Beckman, all Senators Fields and Story, concerning the clarification of certain administrative matters of the Capital Development Committee.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1020, and there is no committee report.
To the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 1020 clarifies some administrative matters of the Capital Development Committee. Surprisingly enough, the actual appointment powers by the Speaker and the Minority Leader and the Senate President and the Senate Minority Leader were not in statute, so this clarifies that they are the ones who make the appointments, and it clarifies the date that the election of the Chair and the Vice Chair of the Capital Development Committee, that date that happens. Good bill, vote yes. I urge an aye vote.
Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. They say that politics is the art of compromise, but this bill is just about changing some dates. And so I would ask that you support this bill.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1020? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1020. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. House Bill 1020 is adopted. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1015.
House Bill 1015 by Representative Arndt, concerning the recreation of the Colorado Water Institute.
Representative Arndt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1015 and the Rural Affairs and Agriculture Committee report.
To the committee report.
In the committee, we amended the bill with L002, which continues the institute without a sunset provision. It also releases funds that already exist in the Water Research Fund to continue the institute, and I urge an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on the committee report from the Rural Affairs Committee? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the committee report. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The committee report is adopted. To the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill recreates because it did lapse due to a sunset provision that was actually, in all honesty, not caught. The Research Institute was created in 1981. The money is there. That's why you see no fiscal note. This recreates a very important institute in our state. The appropriated funds are between right around $200,000 to $300,000, and then we leverage that to get about a $6 million budget for critical water research in our state. And I urge an aye vote in reconstituting our institute.
Any further discussion on House Bill 1015? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1015. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. House Bill 1015 is adopted. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1029.
House Bill 1029 by Representative Arnold, Senator Crowder, concerning the Republican River Water Conservation District and in connection therewith expanding the boundaries of the district and adjusting the meeting schedule of the district's Board of Directors.
Representative Arndt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill, 1029 and the committee report in Rural Affairs and Agriculture.
To the committee report.
Thank you, sir. In the Rural Affairs and Agriculture Committee, we amended this bill to clarify that the board members of the new boundaries, should this bill pass, will be real property owners within the new boundary settings and also be a resident of the county that it is at least partially within the boundaries. And should there be a vacancy will kick off for one of the board of directors if one of those two above mentioned conditions no longer exists. And I urge an aye vote.
Any further discussion on the Rural Affairs and Agriculture Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the committee report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The committee report is adopted.
That's on the committee, that's on the amendment.
To the bill.
Yeah. I got to
Representative-
explain the bill first.
Representative Arndt.
Thank you. So this bill expands the boundaries of the Republican River Water Conservation District to include portions of the Cheyenne County where the groundwater pumping depletes the flow of the Republican River as defined by the Republican River Compact Administration groundwater model. It adjusts the boundaries of the district in Carson, Lincoln, Logan, Sedgwick, and Washington counties to align with the groundwater model. Size of the district's board of directors is also increased from 15 to 17 to reflect the change in boundaries, and it changes the months in which the district board holds its quarterly meetings. In order to meet compact compliance obligations with the state of Kansas, this bill, as I just stated, redefines the boundaries of the Republican River Water Conservation District. The General Assembly originally set the boundaries of the district based along surface topographic lines. As our geology and our hydrology knowledge has increased, we know that wells, roughly 400 wells outside the original boundary lines were also causing depletions and should be included in the boundary and pay $14.50 per irrigated acre to contribute to the compact compliance obligation that all the other well owners that deplete the aquifer have. This is a question of fairness and equity, and I urge an aye vote.
Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment L002 and ask that it be displayed.
The amendment has been moved and will likely be displayed very soon. Get excited, everyone. First floor amendment of the year. And very charming profile. The amendment has been displayed. To the amendment, Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My amendment simply would ask that the effective date not take effect until these new wells are eligible for the federal CREP program. Right now, they would not be, so that is my amendment.
Representative Lewis. Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you can tell from committee, I was actually a no on the bill, but for this resolution, for this amendment, I support it wholly because it gives us more time. It seemed like that in committee when we were there, we heard from 2 attorneys, but we didn't hear from any landowners. We didn't hear from any irrigators. We didn't hear from any ditch owners. And it concerned me, so I was a no vote. And the reason why I was a no vote is I thought, okay, with the infinite wisdom of the State House, we're going to sit here and we're going to tell those people out there what to do. The big hand of government has enough here. We don't need to do this to these farmers. So this amendment will actually buy more time for these people, and we can get to that. And without really getting to have those people come to the Capitol, it was not a good day for government that day. We should have had some of those people here, either on one side or the other. It would have been great to have both sides. But since we did not, this amendment will help to buy more time for these people. I'm a strong proponent of private property rights, and I urge you to vote yes on this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Eskar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I remember hearing this bill and talking about this bill in committee as well, but I'm just concerned about this amendment because as we do talk about the federal government, the timeline can be extensive. We have no idea what that timeline would look like, and I just fear that we won't be able to get the work done that was intended in this legislation and making sure that we are taking care of this issue. But depending on the United States government to help issue something, especially right now in the middle of this shutdown, I'm really concerned that this would just take this into forever. So I would urge a no vote on the amendment.
Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I rise in support of this particular amendment. To use a rural colloquialism, if I said that right, this really is putting the horse in front of the cart. And that's all it's doing. So it's a short amendment. I think it'll certainly help being comfortable with this entire bill. So I urge a yes vote.
Representative Art.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I urge a no vote on this amendment. The idea that this hasn't been a well-known proposition for 2 or 3 years now, I think we first heard it in Water Review Resources Committee 2 or 3 years ago. If I live in Fort Collins and I know about this bill and it came out 9-1 this year, and there's been meetings and meetings and meetings, and I've been out to the Republican River District, I toured it for a whole day, and I met with the board, chairman of the board. They've been reaching out extensively into the model domain well owners that will be affected. To say that no one was there or didn't know about it, didn't come to committee to object, I think is an unusual comment, because it did come out of WRC this summer 9-1, and we had one objection then, but we had no amendments then. This amendment has to do with the program, a federal program, and I agree that they should be qualified for that. But when you have a Supreme Court decision and a compact compliance issue, you need to react to that, and everyone who depletes from that aquifer within the model domain needs to pay for the compact compliance that we all enjoy. Thank you.
Representative Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I, to be honest, I think this is about a fairness issue, that they should have included these wells in the first place. And the fact that they didn't, it's like a government oversight. Now we want to penalize you. And I do think it's not fair that others get the CREP. So I do think that we need to make sure that they are well within their rights of receiving CREP before we can encourage this $14 fine on them. Well, it's not a fine, it's a fee, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too rise in support of the amendment. I think this is about fairness and, like Representative Sain said, not getting the cart before the horse. There's always a proper order in which we go through these things, and to say that, relying on a 2003 U.S. Supreme Court decision, I mean, that's been a lot of time to be able to make this decision, and to just ask for a little bit more time while we wait on the federal government, I believe is very reasonable. So I would urge an aye vote. Thank you.
Representative Art.
Just thank you, Mr. Chair. One more. If we don't include these approximately 400 wells that are around the rims of this, the first boundary, to include the ones who are actually causing depletions, they will be at risk of well curtailment. This protects them from having their wells curtailed. And I think it is a question of fairness, and I do think it is a question of making sure that when we deplete an aquifer and need to meet a compact compliance, that everyone who's doing so is included. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L002? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of L002. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no? No. Amendment L002 fails. To the bill. Representative Art.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I urge an aye vote on this bill.
Any further discussion on House Bill 1029? The question before us is the adoption. Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1029. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. House Bill 1029 is adopted. The spirit with which the no vote was offered is recognized. Mr. Randall, please read the title of Senate Bill 11.
Senate Bill 11 by Senators Williams and Tate, also Representatives Garnett and McKean, concerning the conversion of certain fermented malt beverage licenses issued under the Colorado Beer Code to malt liquor licenses issued under the Colorado Liquor Code.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 11.
To the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Representative McKean, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome
Thank
to
you, Mr. Chair.
Well.
So my testimony on this bill and my description of it today will be alarmingly brief. Beer is beer, folks. Beer is beer. We have simply tried to create too many divisions between how we treat different kinds of beer. Get rid of them. We're done. Beer is beer.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say what an honor it is to work on this very important piece of legislation with Representative McKean, a good dear friend of mine, a great example of bipartisanship. This is a cleanup bill of beer bills of past. We wanted to make sure that we were creating a situation where manufacturers and distributors don't have to create separate places to manufacture their product and separate trucks to transport their product. So this is a way of government just cleaning up unintended consequences that previous sponsors of other beer bills missed.
Is there any further discussion of this cleanup bill to the cleanup bill to the cleanup bill? Representative Escar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to assume the majority leader did not just impugn somebody, but that's okay.
I find no impugning of motives.
And I just want to make sure that we are clear that when Representative McKean says beer is beer, we understand he must not have very great taste in beer.
Oh. It wasn't impugning of motives, it was impugning of taste, which I don't think is actually prohibited by the rules. Representative Liston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I rise in support of Senate Bill 11 as one who's gone through many, many beer wars, beer battles. I would like to rise in a toast to this good beer bill. It is a good bill, so I urge an aye vote and a toast to the sponsors. Thank you.
Any further discussion on Senate Bill 11? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Senate Bill 11. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate Bill 11 is adopted. Mr. Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we lay over House Bill 1008 until Friday, January 25th.
At the request of the Assistant Majority Leader, House Bill 1008 will be laid over until the day he said that I've forgotten already. Mr. Randall, will you please read the title of House Bill 1059?
House Bill 1059 by Representative Arndt, also Senator Tate, concerning removing redundant language in the educator licensing statute regarding requirements for out-of-state applicants.
Representative Arndt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 1059 comes out of Statutory Revision Committee, and I'm sure that you all know about that, so I won't reiterate what that is, but if you'd like to know more, I'd be happy to tell you. And this comes from a bill that Representative Carver and I ran. That was a great bill that talked about military spouses and teacher licensure not having 3 consecutive years of successful teaching, but 3 out of 7 because they move so much. Everyone liked that bill so much, then we had another bill from the start in the Senate that year that said that applied to everyone moving to our state. So then we had a conflict in the statutes. We're removing the word military spouses so that it applies to everyone, and we'll have a nice, tidy statute, and I urge a yes vote.
Given that glowing recommendation, would you like to move House Bill 1059?
I would, no, I wouldn't. I do move House Bill 1059 with federal, no, and I urge an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1059? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1059. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. Seeing House Bill 1059 is adopted. Mr. Randall, Mr. Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we lay over House Bill 1046 until Friday, January 25th.
At the request of the Assistant Majority Leader, the House Bill 1046 will be laid over until January 25th. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1011. Representative Hooten's bill, in case she...
House Bill 1011 by Representative Hooten, also Senator Tate, concerning clarification of the scope of an existing sales tax exemption for manufactured homes.
Representative Hooten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members. I move House Bill 1011 and the committee report.
To the committee report.
Members, this bill was amended in committee to add a safety clause, a petition clause, excuse me, a petition clause.
Any further discussion on the Transportation and Local Government Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the committee report. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Committee report is adopted. To the bill, Representative Hooten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this is also a statutory revision committee bill, and what it does is clarify the ambiguity in state statute over the definition of manufactured homes that qualify for a sales tax exemption. The recommendation passed out of the Statutory Revision Committee unanimously, as well as the Transportation and Local Government Committee. I urge an aye vote.
Any further discussion on House Bill 1011? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1011. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. House Bill 1011 is adopted.
Thank you.
Mr. Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
Seeing no objection, the committee will both rise and report.
The House will come back to order. Mr. Randall, please read the report of the Committee of the Whole.
Madam Speaker, your committee of the whole big sleep report is following touch bills being the agreement with their expiry recommendations thereon. House Bill 1011 is amended. House Bill 1012, House Bill 1015 is amended. House Bill 1020, House Bill 1029 is amended. House Bill 1059 passes second reading in regards to place account for third reading and final passage. Senate Bill 11 passed on second reading order revised place account for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1008 and House Bill 1046 laid over until January 25th, 2019, retaining their place on the calendar.
Very good, Mr. Randall. Representative Gray. Thank you, Representative. There are amendments at the desk. Mr. Randall, please read the amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole.
Representative Pelton moved to amend the report of the Committee of the Whole to reverse the action taken by the committee in not adopting the following Pelton Amendment L002 to House Bill 1029 to show that said amendment passed and that House Bill 1029 as amended passed.
Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm here to amend the Committee of the Whole report.
Representative Pelton, do you want to move your amendment?
I move the Pelton Amendment.
Okay.
Thank you. We really need this timeline to be extended to include the CREP program being in effect before these wells are brought in, because there are some marginal wells that would want to be retired instead of paying the $14.50 an acre. So I want to move my amendment. Thank you.
Representative Sane.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise in support of this amendment once again. We have the privilege, members, of having members of our rural community here in the body, and it's growing fewer and fewer every single year. I rely on their advice. They've talked to their neighbors. They know what they're talking about. I fully support this amendment and the member who brought it.
Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And once again, I support this Pelton Amendment. We visited back and forth, been on text a lot here, and instead of government overreach, let's slow this down, give this a little bit of time for these people that are going to be affected one way or the other. And I think this amendment is really a good idea. So I support the amendment. Thank you.
Representative Soper.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I also rise in support of the amendment. I believe it's a very good amendment. It's about fairness, not putting the cart before the horse. I mean, ultimately, it's about timing, and I really do think this is an excellent amendment. So thank you.
Representative Arndt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I urge a no vote on this amendment. Again, it's a question of CONPUT compliance and a Supreme Court decision. This is an issue that's been going on for a couple years now, and we had no amendments in the WRC, and it was 9-1 again. So I urge this bill to come out as presented. Thank you. I urge a no vote on this amendment.
Anyone else? If there's no further discussion, the question before the House is the adoption of the Pelton Amendment. Mr. Randall, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Mr. Randall, please close the machine. With 23 aye votes, 39 no votes, and 4 excused, the amendment fails. now to don't actually need to pass the committee of the whole report. I know, so I'm just asking what my motion is. Mr. Randall, please open the machine. Mr. Randall, please open the machine to adopt the committee of the whole report. Representatives Ransom and Humphrey. Mr. Randall, please close the machine. With 50 aye votes, 11 no votes, and 4 excused, the committee of the whole report is adopted. That brings us to announcements and introductions. Representative McKean.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Representative Rankin. I've never said those words before. I have, but I have never introduced you as Representative Bob Rankin. I have always introduced him to people as the husband of my favorite state school board member. It has been a delight to work with you. It has been an education working with you. And on your last day in this House, everyone, Representative Bob Rankin.
Thank you, Representative Rankin. We hope you enjoy your nap times. Representative Herod.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, again, I want to thank you for the lovely speeches and the honor you showed us all during MLK, the MLK resolution. I want to invite you all to House District 8, City Park. We will be hosting the parade this year. We march from City Park down to Civic Center Park. Please do join us. If you're interested, send me a message and I'll give you all the details. I believe we're supposed to start at 9, though you won't be late if you get there at 9:30, 10. I will see you there. Thank you.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Once again, colleagues, Cowboy Cowgirl Caucus. It's $250 for individual membership, but be sure to check with Representative Arndt and myself on the possibility of some interesting ways that you can fund this.
Representative Singer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Joint Technology Committee. You guys get to stay and watch the snow with me at 1:30. We'll be up in the Senate committee room talking about some very exciting stuff. So Representative Baisley, Representative Titone, looking forward to seeing you guys at 1:30 today up in the Senate committee rooms. We'll be having lots of fun discussions about budget requests, so everyone else is more than welcome to come and watch the snow fall in while we clear our technology issues with the state.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Quick reminder, Transportation and Local Government Committee, we're meeting with the JBC as soon as we adjourn here. Getting there as quickly as we can means we get to go home as quickly as we can. So as soon as we're done here, get over to 271, the Old State Library, and we'll meet with the JBC. Thank you so much.
Any other announcements or introductions? Before, we're going to do reports of committee. Okay. Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, Representative Buck has a video, a Martin Luther King video. So once we break, if you want to hang out in the chamber and watch that, we'll put that up on the screen. So I just want to make sure that I made that announcement that will be available once we finish up just a few items of business today.
Reports of committee of reference.
Committee on Education. After consideration of the merits of the following House Bill 1002 be amended as follows and necessary amended to be referred to the Committee on Appropriations for favorable recommendation. Committee on Energy and Environment. After consideration of the merits of the following House Bill 1003 be amended as follows and necessary amended to be referred to the Committee on Appropriations as favorable recommendation. House Bill 1050 be amended as follows and necessary amended to be referred to the Committee of the Whole favorable recommendation. Committee on Judiciary. After consideration of the merits of the following House Bill 1060 be referred to the Committee of the Whole favorable recommendation. House Bill 1051 be amended as follows and necessary amended to be referred to the Committee on Appropriations as favorable recommendation. Committee on Rural Affairs and Agriculture. After consideration of the merits of the following House Bill 1026 be amended as follows and necessary amended to be referred to the Committee on Finance with favorable recommendation. House Joint Resolution 1005 be referred to this House for final action.
Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the following bills be calendared for second reading on Friday, January 25th. House Bill 1050, House Bill 1060, House Bill 1001, and House Joint Resolution 1005.
Seeing no objection, the bills will be calendared as described by Representative Garnett. Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the House stand in recess until later today.
Seeing no objection, the House will be in recess till later today. Representative Esgar.